Think back to a dark British night in the early 1960s. A large, black saloon is moving through the rain, slicked streets. As it passes a lamp post, something catches your eye, a small, oval glow at the center of the radiator grille. Not a headlight, not a fog lamp, but the car's own badge, illuminated from within in the distinctive Wolseley tradition that the company had maintained since 1932. No other British manufacturer did that. No other car looked like that in the dark. That glowing badge was, for a generation of British children, pressed against bedroom windows, and for every police officer who ever drove one, the unmistakable face of authority. The Wolseley 6/110 was the car that sat at the apex of BMC's large car range, the vehicle that gave Britain's police forces exactly what they needed in a fast, capable, comfortable patrol car, and the car that the British public, beyond a narrow band of senior professionals, almost entirely refused to buy. Between autumn 1961 and March 1968, Cowley produced just 24,101 examples of the 6/110 across both its Mark I and Mark II versions. For a car positioned at the top of the BMC hierarchy, with Pininfarina styling, a six-cylinder engine shared in basic architecture with the Austin Healey 3000, leather seats, a wooden dashboard, and power-assisted steering available from 1962. That is a very modest number indeed. Why did so capable and so well-equipped a car struggle so badly to find private buyers? Why, in the same years that the Metropolitan Police were deploying it as their prestige area car, did the British motoring public choose the Ford Zodiac or the Rover 2000 instead? And what happened to a marque that had been synonymous with British police work for 3 decades when BMC was absorbed into British Leyland and the accountants finally decided the game was up? That is the story we are telling today. It is a story of engineering quality, badge engineering confusion, market positioning failures, and the peculiar social dynamics of class-conscious Britain in the 1960s. Pull up a chair. Section 1. The Wolseley tradition, where the 6/110 came from. To understand the Wolseley 6/110, you need to understand what the Wolseley name had meant to British policing for the better part of 3 decades before this car ever left the Cowley production line. The relationship between Wolseley and the British police forces stretched back long before the 6/110. The Wolseley 6/80, the immediate post-war flagship, introduced in 1948 and built until 1954, had established the marque's dominance in police fleet procurement. The Metropolitan Police alone are thought to have taken more than 1,000 of those 680 models, deploying them primarily as area cars. The senior-grade vehicles assigned to experienced traffic officers rather than the more routine patrol work handled by smaller, less powerful saloons. Even police cars had a well-defined class structure in Britain, and the Wolseley sat near the top of it. The 680 was followed by the 6/90 series, produced from 1954 to 1959, which carried the tradition forward into the mid-decade years. The 6/90 had been described, accurately, as the definitive British police car of its era, a big black saloon with a Winkworth bell mounted on the front bumper, and that glowing oval badge in the grille that made it unmistakable, even in the blackout of a November night, on the Brell. A 1. By the time the 6/99 arrived in 1959 as the first of the Pininfarina-styled large Wolseleys, the company's relationship with police procurement was essentially institutional. Forces across the country knew the Wolseley name, trusted the Wolseley engine, and had mechanics who understood the Wolseley mechanicals inside and out. When BMC gave the range a comprehensive update for the autumn of 1961, replacing the 6/99 with the improved 6/110, they were therefore not introducing a new concept to the police market. They were delivering a better version of something forces already knew and valued. The question was whether the private buyer would feel the same way. Section 2. The car itself, specifications, and what they meant in practice. The Wolseley 6/110 was built at Cowley on a wheelbase of 9 feet and 2 inches, with an overall height of 5 feet and a half inch and a curb weight of 3,470 pounds. Those are large, solid dimensions. This was a genuinely big saloon by British standards of the early 1960s, with rear seat legroom that had been deliberately increased by 3 inches over the 6/99 by the simple expedient of moving the rear axle back on its springs, stretching the wheelbase by 2 inches in the process. The engine was the BMC C-Series straight 6, displacing 2,912 cubic centimeters. In the 6/110, this unit was tuned to produce 120 brake horsepower at 4,750 revolutions per minute and 163 pounds-feet of torque at 2,750 revolutions per minute. Those engine figures represented an increase over the earlier 6/99's 103 brake horsepower, achieved through cylinder head and camshaft modifications and the fitment of a new twin-bore exhaust system. The same basic C-Series architecture powered the Austin Healey 3000, albeit in a considerably higher state of tune in that application. In the 6/110, the priority was long-legged refinement and effortless cruising rather than sports car performance, and that was exactly what it delivered. The Cambridge-Oxford Owners Club's documented performance figures for the 6/110, drawn from Graham Robson's authoritative book, The Cars of BMC, published by Motor Racing Publications in 1987, give a maximum speed of 102 miles per hour, with 0 to 60 miles per hour, achieved in 13.3 seconds, a standing quarter mile in 19.4 seconds, and overall fuel consumption of 19 miles per imperial gallon. Motorsport magazine's road test of the car in April 1962 found it capable of 105 miles per hour, returning 20.7 miles per gallon under test conditions that included driving in London and numerous cold starts. The Mark I, produced from autumn 1961 to spring 1964, came with a 3-speed gearbox and optional Borg-Warner automatic transmission. Motorsports Tester noted some frustration with the 3-speed unit and its widely spaced ratios, and the observation that the car was probably better in automatic form was one that many contemporary owners appear to have shared. The gear lever had at least been moved from the steering column, which had been a particular criticism of the 6/99, to a floor-mounted position. From July 1962, the Hydrosteer variable ratio power-assisted steering became available as an option, as did air conditioning, an unusual luxury for a British family saloon of that period. The Mark II arrived in May 1964 with the most significant mechanical improvement of the car's career. A proper 4-speed gearbox replaced the 3-speed unit, with Borg-Warner overdrive now available as an option at £51 extra rather than as standard fitment. The suspension settings were revised, the wheels were reduced to 13-inch diameter from the larger earlier size, and the interior received a restyled fascia. Reclining front seats were fitted, whose backrests incorporated picnic tables for the benefit of rear seat passengers, a thoughtful touch that gave the 6/110 a genuinely continental flavor at a time when such features were more commonly associated with German and Swedish saloons than with cars from Cowley. The interior throughout the car's production life was exactly what you would expect from the premium mark in the BMC family: polished wood on the dashboard and door cappings, leather upholstery on both the front seats and the rear bench, which had a fold-down central armrest, a choice of single-tone or duotone exterior color schemes, front disc brakes of 10 3/4 inches, Lockheed system, vacuum servo-assisted. This was a car whose equipment and finish placed it convincingly in the upper tier of the British market. The Motorsport Test car, a Mark I in 3-speed form, fitted with a radio and front safety belts, cost £1,390, 16 shillings and 5 pence, inclusive of purchase tax. When the Mark II was announced in 1964, the Wolseley was priced at £1,179, sitting above the Austin A110 Super Deluxe at £1,112, and well above the basic Austin A110 at £997. Section 3. The police car that defined a generation. If there is a single image that crystallizes the Wolseley 6, 110 inches the British public consciousness, it is the Metropolitan Police Area car. Specifically, it is the sight of a large, dark Wolseley with its illuminated radiator badge glowing in the rain, a blue roof lamp, and the quiet but unmistakable authority of a vehicle that knows it can catch almost anything else on the road with minimal effort. The Metropolitan Police deployed the 6/110 as what the force classified as an area car, a designation that placed these vehicles above the routine patrol fleet in both capability and driver qualification. Area car drivers were specially trained officers, and the cars they drove needed to match their skills. 102 miles per hour top speed, 13 and a bit seconds to 60, disc brakes at the front, and a smooth, torquey 6-cylinder engine that could be held at high speed on a motorway without strain. These were precisely the qualities a traffic officer needed. The illuminated Wolseley badge, a feature the company had carried without interruption since 1932 and would maintain on every car it built until the very last Wolseley left the factory in 1975, added a quality that no specification sheet could quantify: recognizability. In an era before flashing LED light bars and high-visibility livery, that glowing oval in the grille identified a Wolseley police car in the dark as surely as a uniform identified a constable on the pavement. The psychological effect on other road users was documented in its day and is remembered vividly by anyone old enough to have encountered one. The AR Online archive contains a photograph of a 1965 Wolseley 6/110 Mark II automatic in Metropolitan Police Service, photographed at Trafalgar Square. It is a document of its era, a large, purposeful, immaculately maintained black saloon that carries its authority entirely naturally, without aggression or theatre. Police forces across Britain, from the Metropolitan to the county constabularies, operated these cars throughout the 1960s. They were trusted machines. They were also, as one commentator at Curbside Classic observed, reasonably brisk, thanks to sharing an engine with the famous Austin Healey 3000. Although in a lower state of tune, that connection to one of Britain's most celebrated sports cars was, in its quiet way, a rather effective endorsement. The association between Wolseley and police work was so deeply embedded in British popular culture that the Cambridge-Oxford Owners Club, in their documentation of the 6/99 and 6/110, include a trivia note recording that the climactic scene of the 1988 British film Buster, which depicts the aftermath of the 1963 Great Train Robbery, required such a large number of doubless Wolseley police cars that the question inevitably arose of how on earth they found them all. It is the sort of trivia that illustrates how completely and how lastingly the Wolseley name became synonymous with British police work of that period. Section 4. Why the British public said no. And yet, for all the police orders and all the earned respect, the private buyer largely stayed away. 24,101 cars across 7 years of production. In a market where the Ford Zephyr 6 was selling in considerably greater volumes, and where the Rover 2000, launched in 1963 at a similar price point, found an entirely new and enthusiastic audience among professional men who wanted something genuinely different. The Wolseley's sales figures tell a clear story. The problem, in essence, was a familiar one for BMC during this period. Badge engineering had blurred the lines between marques to the point where the purchasing public could no longer clearly identify what Wolseley offered that justified its premium price. The 6/110 shared its body with the Austin A110 Westminster and the Vanden Plas Princess 3-liter. The differences were real. The Wolseley had more comprehensive standard equipment, a higher specification interior, and the marque prestige of that illuminated badge. But they were not differences that most buyers could immediately identify from the pavement or the showroom forecourt. As one commentator summed up the market position at Curbside Classic, by 1963 and 64, The 6/110 was caught in a pincer movement between two very different competitors. On one side, the Ford Zephyr and Zodiac and the Vauxhall Cresta offered similar or greater space at more competitive prices, with styling that felt more contemporary to buyers who were watching what happened in America and wanted something that reflected those influences. On the other side, the Rover 2000 and the Triumph 2000, both introduced in the mid-1960s, offered a more modern, better engineered driving experience to exactly the kind of professional buyer that Wolseley had historically targeted, but wrapped in a more clearly differentiated prestige identity. The 6/110 fell between the two camps. It was neither as good value as the larger Fords, nor as dynamically advanced or clearly upmarket as the Rovers and Triumphs. And crucially, as the Rover P6 and Triumph 2000 were demonstrating, the British professional class of the 1960s was beginning to care quite deeply about how a car drove, not just how it looked or what it was equipped with. The 6/110, with its vague steering and considerable overall weight, was not a car that rewarded an enthusiastic driver. It was a car that rewarded a measured, unhurried one. The police could live with that because they valued other qualities above all. The private buyer, increasingly, could not. Section 5, the end of the line and what remained. Production of the Wolseley 6/110 ended in March 1968. The timing was, as the Cambridge-Oxford Owners Club's documentation notes, with appropriate understatement, positioned between the announcement of the British Leyland merger and the actual inauguration of that company. In other words, the last 6/110s were being assembled at Cowley, just as the convulsions of the British motor industry's forced consolidation were beginning. The model was not replaced with a direct successor bearing the Wolseley name. The Austin A110, that had been its stablemate, was itself replaced by the unsuccessful Austin 3-liter, which remained in production until 1971, and which nobody remembers fondly. The Wolseley mark itself staggered on until 1975, attached to smaller cars of increasingly uncertain identity, before the name was finally retired on the short-lived and rare Princess 1822. The illuminated badge went dark permanently that year, and with it went one of the most distinctive visual signatures in the history of British motoring. Of the 24,101 6/110s built, surviving numbers are very small. A classic car auction listing in recent years described one of the known surviving Mark IIs as being among approximately 100 examples still on the road according to How Many Left, a figure that gives some sense of just how comprehensively time and the British weather have reduced this once familiar machine to near obscurity. When good examples do surface, they tend to sell in the range of £10,000 to £15,000 for properly restored cars, which reflects both their rarity and the relatively contained collector market for large BMC saloons of this era. Parts availability is assisted by the mechanical commonality with the Austin A110 Westminster and, to a degree, with the wider C-Series engine family. The Wolseley Owners Club maintains an archive and provides support for remaining cars. The Wolseley Register, based near Blackburn in Lancashire, holds an impressive collection of period materials going back decades and is the primary historical resource for anyone researching these cars seriously. The Wolseley 6/110 is one of the more instructive case studies in what can go wrong when a well-engineered car is positioned in a market it cannot quite define for itself. The police saw its qualities instantly and deployed it without hesitation. It was fast enough, smooth enough, reliable enough, and imposing enough, and it came with that glowing badge that identified it as something serious in the dark. For those purposes, it was nearly ideal. But the private buyer needed something different from the equation. He needed to know what he was buying that his neighbor who spent less on a Ford Zodiac was not getting. He needed a driving experience that matched the premium price, and he needed a mark identity clear enough to justify the choice in the context of a British car market that was, by the mid-1960s, becoming genuinely competitive in ways it had not been in the decade before. The 6/110 offered quality. It offered equipment. It offered that remarkable lineage stretching back through the Wolseley police cars to the 6/80 and beyond. What it could not quite offer was a compelling, contemporary reason to buy it over the Rover 2000 or the Triumph 2000, at a moment when the British professional buyer was beginning to care about those reasons more than any previous generation had. It is a car that deserves to be remembered more clearly than it is. Not as a great car, it was not that, quite, but as a genuinely competent, well-built, properly equipped saloon that served British policing with distinction for an entire decade and asked nothing more than to be appreciated on its own straightforward terms. Now, we would very much like to hear from you. Did you ever ride in a Wolseley 6/110 as a child, or encounter one with a blue lamp on the roof in your rearview mirror? Perhaps you remember the sight of that illuminated badge on a dark road, or you have a personal connection to one of the surviving examples. Tell us your story in the comments below. This car's history lives in the memories of the people who were there. If you found this video worthwhile, please give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who share this passion for the cars that actually shaped British roads in the 1960s. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is a good moment to change that. There are many more stories ahead. Thank you sincerely for watching. Your attention and your knowledge make every one of these videos worth making.